So last, but by no means least, is another incredible, inspiring figure. Asad Rehman heads up the work on international climate for Friends of the Earth. He's also been an inspiring and leading voice here in the UK and internationally on climate justice. He's a long-standing organiser against racism, and he's also the co-founder of Stop the War Coalition. Please give him a warm, warm welcome to the stage.
Sisters, brothers, friends, Assalamu alaikum. First of all, let me also thank the organisers for inviting me to speak at this panel, and of course all the very eloquent and words of wisdom that you've heard, and they are a hard act to follow. I've been actually asked to say a few words about the global environmental crisis that faces all of us and possible visions of the future. Well, first of all, we live in a time of post-truth, where truth is no longer that, but something to be negotiated, something to be twisted, something to be interpreted, or new realities created. So I think it's really important that first we recognise that truth. So apologies for those who know this better than me, but I think it's worth restating. This isn't just an environmental crisis. It's actually a crisis of injustice that says black lives and poor lives don't matter. It's a crisis of a broken economic system that puts profit before people and planet. It's a global crisis of empathy, humanity and justice. Climate change is simply the crisis of all crises. It fans the flames of every existing inequality and injustice in the world. Conflict, forced migration, racial and gender injustice, hunger, economic inequality, systems collapse, extreme weather, you name it, climate change has its fingerprints all across them. The time is long past when you needed to be a climate scientist to know that there's something seriously going wrong in the world we live in. Last year saw the hottest average temperatures since records began, and it's likely that this year, 2016, will see a repeat. Temperatures are now hotter than they have been for 120,000 years. Raising global temperatures by just 1 degree centigrade has been enough to melt half the ice in the Arctic, kill huge swathes of the world's coral, and unleash lethal floods and famines. Higher temperatures mean extreme weather. In Pakistan, where I'm from, this year we had a heat wave which hit 53 degrees centigrade. That's literally at the upper end of what human beings can tolerate in the outdoors. The government began to dig mass graves. Last year, we had a similar heat wave, and in one city alone, 1,200 people died in that heat wave. And yet, this is also the same country where in 2012, we had one flood which affected 20 million people, which created $43 billion worth of damage. And my country is a country where 4 out of 10 people live and suffer severe multiple poverty, where one shock pushes the most vulnerable from barely being able to survive to not being able to survive. And in the Sahel, the story is the same all over the world. In the Sahel, in sub-Saharan Africa, we've got a drought that's going on at the moment. 23 million people affected, 3.5 million people displaced. You probably remember the pictures of the super typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, which killed 7,000 people and left 20 million people homeless. And that's happening absolutely every single place. And if it's not huge losses of life, in the island of Dominica in the Caribbean, one storm, Storm Erica, put back development gains by 20 years. One single storm that was there. And the list is absolutely endless. Some people are estimating that 700,000 people per year, our fellow citizens around the world, are already losing their lives because of climate change, with millions of more people who are being affected, who are losing their homes and their livelihoods. And just to give you some more bad news, you probably know the name James Hansen, the renowned NASA climate scientist. Well, he just recently issued a report where he said, we've identified a new feedback mechanism of the Antarctic that suggests sea level rises could rise 10 times faster than previously predicted, 10 feet by 2065. And the authors of that report included this chilling warning. If emissions aren't cut, we conclude that multi-metre sea level rise would become practically unavoidable. Social disruption and economic consequences of such large sea level rises would be devastating. Even the most optimistic projections, based on the UN climate agreement that was made in Paris last year, have temperatures leading to at least 3 degrees above pre-industrial level, whilst other world climate scientists say the scenarios could lead up to 7.8 degrees warming by the end of the century. Social movements in the global south, groups, climate justice groups like Friends of the Earth, 100 governments representing the poor and the most vulnerable, campaigned and said we have to keep temperatures below 1.5. In fact, from the front lines, the call came 1.5 to barely stay alive. Now, here's another truth, and it's an analogy and I'm sure you've all heard. You know, it's the one where we're all on the Titanic and we've hit the proverbial climate iceberg and the Titanic's continuing to plough onwards. And it's absolutely true that climate change will and does affect all of us. But the reality is that citizens of rich industrial countries, overwhelmingly white, are still on the top deck, sipping cocktails, listening to the orchestra, and hoping that there's some technical advancement or something miraculous will happen that will save them. Whilst at the same time, in the hold are poor, black, brown and indigenous people already drowning. And when they try and escape, they find that the hold of the Titanic is shut and locked. And that's the reality, that climate change is not just an environmental issue. It's an issue of racial and economic injustice. And the greatest injustice of climate change, of course, is those who are least responsible for causing the crisis are the ones being most affected. Just 10%. Just 10% of the world's population are responsible for 50% of global emissions, whereas the poorest 50% of the world's population are responsible only for 10% of emissions. No guessing where the majority of that rich 10% live. They live in the wealthy countries in the north. In the United States, which has 5% of the world's population, they have a per capita income of about $41,064 per year. Each citizen emits about 17.3 tonnes of CO2 every single year. In India, which has 18% of the world's population, they have a per capita income of just over $3,000. And each citizen is responsible for only about 1.4 tonnes of CO2. The poorest countries in the world, and they represent about 11% of the world's population, overwhelmingly in Africa, they have a per capita income at the moment of about $1,461. And they're responsible, on average, for 0.9 tonnes per head. And here is another truth that we have to accept. Current policy logic by our governments are all calculated to overshoot the amount of carbon pollution that we can emit to keep temperatures below 1.5 or even 2 degrees. In fact, they estimate they're going to emit 3 times more of the carbon budget for 1.5 and then somehow hope they can suck out 2/3 of that carbon back out of the atmosphere. By the way, there's no available technology that can do that. It's simply cross your fingers and hope something happens in the future. Carbon Brief calculated that we have between 5 to 10 years of a carbon budget left if we want to keep temperatures well below 1.5 and save the people and the planet they've started to call it Decade Zero. The decisions we make in this decade will determine the life and livelihood of so many people. For temperature level, that the government, including our government here in the UK, that they talk about, this 2-degree guardrail, they hope, and there's only about 15 to 20 years left of that budget, they hope to be able to pollute as much and then be able to suck it back. In fact, they've got this crackpot idea. It's called bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. Now, even if you could do that, and at the moment it's not proven that you can do that, even if you can turn the temperature down once the thermometer goes back up, and you have no idea what the irreversible damage that will do to the planet's ecosystems, that system alone requires 6 times the land that is currently being used all around the world for food production. No guess as to whose land will be taken and who will face the social and environmental impact of that, the more people who are the most marginalised. To put it frankly, if we want to keep temperatures well below 1.5, we can't dig any new coal mines, drill any new fields, build any new pipelines, not a single one. If we allow energy companies to burn the fossil fuels, not that they're discovering, but the ones that they've already claimed, that the ones that they already want to exploit, will burn the planet 5 times over. So why? If we know this, why are we allowing this to happen? And not just happen, but why are our governments financially and politically supporting that? Well, globally, direct and indirect subsidies to the dirty energy corporations is estimated to run at an incredible $10 million per minute. And here in the UK, our government, is handing out billions in tax breaks and subsidies to dirty energy companies and fracking companies, whilst, of course, cutting support for those most in need. Dirty energy companies generate, at the moment, $27.6 trillion in revenue each year, racking up a massive $1.5 trillion in profit. Plenty of money for those who are profiting to be able to influence our political system, so that those who claim to act in our name don't act in our interest. Why? Because, like austerity, climate change is the redistribution of carbon from the poor to the rich. It's actually the redistribution of life from the poor to the rich. And it's the same elites, the ones who continue to promote this broken economic system, that allows 62 people to own as much wealth as 3.5 billion people in the world. A system that extracts more and more of its surplus value from making us all work longer and longer for less and less, that ravages our planet in unsustainable growth for the benefit of a tiny elite, that richest 1%, who at this moment own 50% of all global wealth. The poorest 80% of the whole of the world own only 5.5% of global wealth. And it's an inequality that worsens each and every year. It's a system that is now commodifying not just the air we breathe, but our water, our earth, our fellow species, and even our own bodies, where our value comes not from who we are, but from how we consume and what we wear, not from how we connect with each other or what is our social good. Sir Nicholas Stern is a renowned British economist, not the most radical of fellows. He wrote the book and the report, The Economics of Climate Change. He called climate change was the greatest single failure of the free market system. And it's these same multinationals that are now pushing for free trade agreements, such as TTIP and CETA, that will not only protect their destructive business model, but will allow them to sue governments for daring to threaten that business model and their profits. The solutions to tackling climate change have long been apparent, and we do have the solutions. We know we need to change the way we consume and produce our energy. But that doesn't mean simply getting dirty energy corporations to ditch dirty energy for clean energy. It actually means energy has to be seen as a social good. It has to be owned and controlled by people, by local authorities, by workers, by tenants groups, by local citizens, people like you and me. It means reducing wasteful energy, shifting energy production away from destructive and harmful industries. 40 years ago, not far from here, workers at Lucas Aerospace proposed an alternative industrial plan for the factories that were creating and making armaments. 40 years ago, they said saving jobs, but also producing wind turbines, kidney dialysis machines, and other socially useful goods. That's the kind of climate unionism we need. Creating new jobs, clean jobs, good jobs, union jobs, but jobs that are good for people and for our economy and for our planet. And it's a green industrial strategy that we need. And it's a green industrial strategy that we need. We need it here in the UK, backed by a green industrial bank, but also at a global level. We need to end the power of the World Bank and its discredited financial institutions. We need to invest in renewable energy and a green industrial strategy that works for everybody. And that means more than one phone charger for the poor in the global south or one light bulb, just as much as it means not allowing our pensioners in the global north to have to choose between heating or eating. It means energy that people need to meet their productive needs. And it can be done. Energy experts say we can completely meet the energy needs of the poor and decarbonise our energy systems by investing in decentralised, people's-owned renewable energy systems. It also means fixing our food systems, which are responsible for about a third of our global emissions. It's incredible. We can feed the world 3 times over. Yet every year, we plough 1.3 billion tonnes of food into the ground, roughly 1/3 of all food production, whilst nearly 800 million people around the world are malnourished. It's a food system that, of course, here in Liverpool, and in many towns and cities, has people relying on food banks, while big business who control our food system are happy to send that food to waste dumps. The truth is, multinationals now have seized control of so much of our lives, like they've seized control of our planet's food resources, dominating not just the growing, the processing, but sale of all meat, grain and oil. Just 2 companies now control 65% of the world's trade in grain. And these companies are now seeking to patent nature, to be able to make their profits from nature. In India, Monsanto, their attempt to control the seeds has led to millions of farmers being plunged into debt. It's now calculated that every 30 minutes, a farmer in India commits suicide because of those debts. There has been 250,000 farmers so far who have committed suicide in India, and that figure continues to grow. But again, we have a solution, and it's not just us making it up. The UN experts at the Food Agency have said agroecology, sustainable agriculture, the agriculture that is practiced by millions of farmers and peasants all around the world, not only can feed us, but it can actually cool the planet at the same time. I really could go on about what's out there. I could tell you about these incredible visions of cities and towns that already exist, places where energy systems are integrated, where we generate energy locally, collectively, wind, solar and aerobic digestion, where energy-efficient buildings actually create the energy that we need, where roof gardens and urban food farms bring clean and affordable food to all of us and not just the affluent few, where public transport is a public good, where we end this mindless privatisation and deregulation of our transport systems, where in a race to the bottom they pollute us with their fumes while handing over huge dividends to their shareholders. We don't lack the solutions. We don't lack the technical know-how or the resources. What we lack is the political will to act and to act now. the human cost of that failure to act is growing. You may have read in this week, one single boat that sank off the coast of Egypt took the lives of 500 people. In May of this year, 800 people died in one single week. Their bodies recovered from the Mediterranean Sea. Men, women, children, young and old, decaying bodies. When you talk to the people who went and have been bringing and rescuing, bringing those bodies back, they'll tell you about bodies entwined, lovers entwined as they drowned. They'll tell you about how pregnant women, under the stress of drowning, give premature birth. Their babies drowned with them while still attached by the umbilical cord. Last year, 3,277 people drowned in the Mediterranean. This year, we've already beaten that number. And next year, I'm sure that number will increase. The UN, their International Organization on Migration, have said that climate-induced migration, or survival migration, as I would call it, will reach 250 million people by the year 2050. This isn't a refugee or a migrant crisis. This is a crisis of our consumption, of our pollution, of the actions of our banks, our corporations and our governments. And those people that are seeking safe haven, that are now demonised, neglected, put into detention centres, whilst our governments are putting more money into building walls and refuse to do their fair share to help. This is a glimpse of the future. It's a dystopian future of walls and fences, of millions of people being sacrificed to allow the rich to be able to continue to consume. A future where the response to the climate crisis is going to be led by warships. A future where at the exact moment we need more solidarity, more justice, the world retreats into right-wing popular nationalism, racism and xenophobia. To friends, our challenge is to stop that. It's to build a movement for transformational change. A movement that isn't locked into narrow single-issue struggles, but that is intersectional, connects our local and fights to our global struggles, that is rooted at its core in justice and solidarity. And it also recognises this struggle is about life and death. And you know what? It also recognises that those in power do not give up their power without a struggle. A movement that is built on people's demands, demands that connect us to the realities of those on the front lines, that value their voices, their bodies and their struggles. And it's a movement that understands the fundamental question to power lies with us, people. Arundhati Roy, the Indian activist and novelist, eloquently put it. She said, if there's any hope for the planet at all, it does not live in climate change conference rooms or in cities with tall buildings. It lives low down on the ground, with its arms around the people who go to battle every day to protect their forests, their mountains and their rivers, because they know that those forests and the mountains and rivers protect them. And a first step to do that is actually to stop the killing of those with imagination of an alternative. Every single week, 2 environmental defenders are killed around the world, not just for protecting their environment, their communities and their homes. They're killed because they're creating a space for an alternative. They're saying that decent life doesn't require us to have huge infrastructure or to dig up death from the ground. In the 1970s, a Greek poet penned some words which have been taken up by the Mexican movement. You've probably heard them, because they're now uttered at the graves of all those who are being killed for believing in their future. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. Whilst our brothers and sisters face this struggle with their lives, friends, it's not simply enough for us to mourn their deaths on Facebook. We have to build a movement that acts in solidarity with their struggle. A movement that says, Black Lives Matter, everywhere. A movement that recognises a movement that is also humble enough to recognise that change is happening. It's happening all over the world. a movement that isn't timid, that is willing to speak truth to power, and that can stand to the challenges ahead of us and say, bring it on. That's the kind of movement we have to build. And you know, in our imagined world, we shouldn't be faint-hearted, and we shouldn't be situating that in the distant future, decades from now. What we need is that imagination of our future, our dreams, to inspire hope and belief right now. We must demand the world we want, but we must demand it now. And you know what? There are those who are bringing that world into reality already here now. Arundhati Roy also famously said, and I'm sure you all heard it, she said, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Friends, let me tell you, I can hear it more than breathing. I can hear it roaring. I hear it roaring in the voices of the indigenous communities that are stopping the Dakota pipeline in the United States. I hear it roaring in the campaigns in the black community, demanding an end to state-sponsored killing of black people simply for being black. I hear it in the roar of the Indian farmer who rejects Monsanto and its killer seeds. I hear it in the roar of friends and comrades as they bury another environmental defender like Sister Berta Caceres. I hear it also in the voices of the women's movement fighting for the right to control their bodies, as it is in the fight of the lesbian, gay and transgender movement fighting for dignity. And I hear it in the roar of workers and environmentalists and citizens as they reject TTIP and other free trade agreements. But friends, I also hear that roar. You know where I hear it? I hear it here. I hear it here amongst all of us. Our challenge is to make that roar grow louder. We have to organise and we have to win. Thank you.
Standing ovation. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much, Asad. Very few speakers can provide very solid, knowledgeable substance, tell us what's wrong with the world, whilst also providing inspiring ways that we can come to resolve it. Thank you very, very much for still being here, folks, with your beautiful energy and your beautiful appreciation. We have a couple of questions for Asad. Thank you for tweeting them. One of the things I think is probably one of the most important questions is, how do we ensure that we centre the voices of those in the Global South and the indigenous communities in our movement for climate justice?
Well, I think for far too long, and one of the mistakes that the environment movement did and the climate movement made, they talked about climate change as being something distant. Not in our lives, not even in the lives of our children. You know, in our lives, the lives of our grandchildren. They talked about climate as being an issue about polar bears. I love polar bears. I want them to live and be happy on their ice floats. But that's not how you connect people. You have to be centred to the movements in the South. That's why, Friends of the Earth, we're part of a global federation. Our policies and positions are directed by those on the front line. People call and say what we're calling for, 80% emission reduction by 2030. They say it's unrealistic. And I say, that's not our challenge. Our challenge is to be true to the science and true to the principles of justice. And when we don't be true to that, what we're doing is we're sacrificing the lives and livelihoods of people. And people know that. You go around the environment movement and everybody secretly knows all of the things that I've just said to you, but they won't dare say it to even their own members and supporters. They won't dare say it and go out and talk about it. And we have to stop that timidity. We have to be able to tell the truth. You can't build a movement without telling the truth. So we have to tell the truth, but we also have to give people hope.
And the final question, which I think you've been giving us the answer to, but I'm going to ask nonetheless, is can we resolve climate change within capitalism?
Well, the famous slogan of the climate justice movement was always system change, not climate change. And And of course, we all know the inequalities, the inequities, the current economic system. We want to call it neoliberalism, we want to call it a broken economic system. Friends of the Earth International has an economic justice programme. It's called Resisting Neoliberalism, Economic Justice. So, absolutely, I don't think it's compatible. It is clearly not compatible. It's not compatible to have growth infinitum. It's not possible to be able to destroy the planet and its people in the way we're doing. We need a different economic model. We need a sustainable economic model. We need local economic models. We need regional economic models. I don't want to get hung up in how you name them, necessarily, because I think we create them and we create new realities. But they are being created. There are alternative economic models being created, not only in our own country here, but across all around the world. That's our challenge. Our challenge is to recognise, and I agree with Paul, on this, you know, maybe I go back to my decades, I think there is one no, and that there are many yeses. And we have to recognise the diversity of those many yeses. And in our movement, we can have alternative economic models, but we can all unite and say that the current economic system, the current model of neoliberalism, is not tenable, is not just, and it can't last for longer.
Please continue giving us a round of applause as he leaves with a fantastic speech. Folks, how are you feeling? I want to almost make you like get up and shake it out, but I'm worried you'll all run off and not hear the end of my bit. Feeling all right? Feeling inspired? Feeling energetic? Okay, awesome. Because we've got a few more days of sessions left at The World Transformed, and I hope that the rest of them are filled with the kind of energy that we've had from the speakers and from yourselves, which is this idea of imagining a new future, folks. We know what we don't want. We know what's wrong with the society. So now let's start talking about what we do want. What is our vision for the future? And I think if there's one thing that I would like to ask you to take away with you, is something that I've noticed in our organising, is we must constantly keep creating spaces where we welcome new people into this movement. And as much as we are claiming back power from the political elites, sometimes that means with our new comrades we have to relinquish a little bit of our power to give it to them, to empower them, so that they come on this journey with us. Because I can see that this movement is growing, and I can see the energy, I can feel the energy, I can see the energy. But we also need to keep it growing, and I have no doubt that it will keep going. And I'm grateful that you've come out this evening and stayed with us, and I hope to see you at more sessions this week. Keep it up, folks. Thank you very, very much. Good night. And also, if you like Twitter and you've been great with your questions, tweet at us at TWT_now, hashtag TWT2016, hashtag Future Visions. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely, lovely evening.
Can we have a big round of applause for our guest presenter and host extraordinaire, Sakina Sheikh, everybody?